When theorizing about the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, pretty much everyone can agree that there will be a single climactic battle that brings about the end of the long night. But it's when and how that'll happen where things can get confusing. The most common idea is that the final battle will take place at Winterfell, which I think would be possible. It's the focal point of the Stark storyline, and definitely has a connection with the first Long Night, as well as some magical powers. I would be fine with that ending, but I think there's a more likely location for the final battle, which is foreshadowed in various different places. As the prologue says, we should start back. So how about we begin at the war between the First Men and the Children of the Forest? After the fighting reaches a standstill, the two forces gather on the Isle of Faces to make a pact which marks the end of the war. Not only is the Isle of Faces very historically relevant, but it's full of weirwoods and green men, which George R.R. Martin has stated are going to be relevant to the endgame of the story. But this alone only proves that the Isle of Faces will be important somehow. We can look at certain battles that parallel this to find out what will occur at the end of the Long Night. Stannis' battle against the Bolton forces has yet to happen in the books, but there are some clues that have been laid that give a pretty solid blueprint for how it'll happen. The Night Lamp theory says Stannis' army will burn the weirwoods in the middle of a frozen lake, which will confuse the Boltons and lead them out onto the ice. This will allow Stannis' army to destroy the ice and drown most of the Bolton army, decisively winning the battle. We can also look at some Night's King parallels to see how Stannis compares. The king's close-cropped beard was spiderwebbed with grey hairs, and he had dropped 2 stone or more of weight. He had never been a fleshy man, but now the bones moved between his skin like spears, fighting to cut free. Even his crown seemed too large for his head. His eyes were blue pits lost in deep hollows, and the shape of a skull could be seen beneath his face. Stannis is already a character who parallels the Night King, but as a fiery alternative version. He has a skeletal, blue-eyed look, like the others. He stayed in the Night Fort, where the Night's King reigned. He has a fiery magic woman in Melisandre, while the Night's King had a magical ice woman in the Corpse Queen. And now Stannis is coming down from the north towards Winterfell, in which is exactly like the Night's King would do. But in this scenario, I think the lake with the weirwood in the middle would be replaced with the Isle of Faces, which is pretty much exactly that. In this mirrored scenario, the Army of Fire, including Daenerys, her dragons, and all of Westeros' armies, will be battling with the Army of Ice, aka the others. But since this is a parallel inversion, the people burning the weirwoods will be the good guys on the fire team, burning the Isle of Faces. Why would they do that? Maybe the others' powers come from the trees. Maybe the trees are corrupted and need to be cleansed. Either way, burning the weirwood trees seems essential for victory, and the Isle of Faces is the perfect place for that to happen. Since it's the southernmost place with weirwoods, there could be a race against time to do something with them before the others get to them. It makes for a pretty good symbolic parallel too, with the icy white weirwoods being combined with fire. There's another important incident that happens at the Isle of Faces though, and that's the battle above the God's Eye. Skip to the next chapter if you don't want to be spoiled for what's going to happen far in the future of House of the Dragon. In short, Aemond and Daemon have a dragon battle above the lake, which ends in Daemon stabbing Aemond in the eye, taking them both down. Aemond makes a good Night's King parallel here, with his striking blue eye reminding us of the others. The Night's King also rules for 13 years, while Aemond waits 13 days to strike. This gives us some good symbolism for how the fight will go down. And then it was, the tales tell us, that Prince Daemon Targaryen swung a leg over his saddle and leapt from one dragon to the other. In his hand was Dark Sister, the sword of Queen Visenya. As Aemond One Eye looked up in terror, fumbling with the chains that bound him to his saddle, Daemon ripped off his nephew's helm and drove the sword down into his blind eye, So hard, the point came out the back of the young prince's throat. Half a heartbeat later, the dragon struck the lake, sending up a gout of water so high that it was said to have been as tall as King's Spire Tower. The princess and the queen. Of course, there'll be a massive dragon battle above the God's Eye, with the Night King / Aemond being defeated. But one missing detail in Daemon's story is what happened to him afterwards. The records say that his body was never found, but it seems like a weird loose end to leave, since both dragons and Aemond were found later. It wouldn't be a stretch, however, to speculate that he could have either swam or washed up on the Isle of Faces, where humans tend not to go. The Isle of Faces represents Avalon to me, the mythological land where King Arthur goes to rest. It also has a lake where Excalibur was found and returned, like how Dark Sister was lost in the God's Eye for some time. If Daemon is King Arthur here, then his death and preservation here would parallel Arthur being brought there to rest indefinitely. The character who I think will fulfill this role is Jon Snow, who seems the most Arthur-like in this story. He'll probably wield Arthur Dayne's sword, Dawn, and be the archetypal lost heir to a kingdom who becomes a warrior hero. If he's killed or seriously wounded in the battle, he could be laid to rest with the weirwoods, and maybe absorbed into them for some magic shenanigans. Why he and Daenerys have to be put out of commission I'll get into later. The other big thing Harrenhal is known for is Jaehaerys' Great Council, which meant to determine his successor. Having all of the great lords meet in one place to decide the next successor is probably going to be necessary in the future of this story. And why not do it in the largest castle in Westeros, where the forces of the living have already been mustered? There are also two things I think will tie back to Robert's rebellion. First, there was the tourney at Harrenhal, which pretty much kicked off the events of the story. It would align well if the ending of the story is right back where it started. Secondly, the Trident. It makes sense that some of the fight would take place right where Robert's rebellion ended, especially since Daenerys dreams about burning her enemies here. I also have a feeling that something important will happen here that turns the tide of the battle, since it's pretty close to Harrenhal, only a bit to the north. The Trident also happens to be the place where Torrhen Stark knelt to Aegon, which makes it a place where ice and fire can be balanced. That night, she dreamt that she was Rhaegar, riding to the Trident. But she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurper's rebel host across the river, they were armored all in ice, but she bathed them in dragon fire, and they melted away like dew, and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare, and I have only now awakened. Daenerys 3, A Storm of Swords. With the blowing of a horn, the others begin to march down from the north. The Night's Watch is woefully unprepared, and the north is put on high alert. The reincarnated Jon Snow and Daenerys mount their forces at Winterfell, preparing for a battle against the others. While the forces of the living put up a good fight, they're once again defeated and forced to flee south, probably on Dragonback. While the main characters struggle to rebuild their forces in disarray, the army of the dead devours the north, killing thousands, if not millions in the process. The army continues to march south, freezing over the Twins and walking through the Neck, while the people of the south and the royalty in King's Landing are forced to confront their threat. As the others sweep through the Trident, some sort of discovery is made. Maybe it's a way to defeat the others, or something about the dragons, or the true nature of the Azor Ahai prophecy. Daenerys burns through the armies there, destroying or purifying the whites there. But the march continues. The last and greatest army mankind can muster is assembled at Harrenhal to await the battle that will decide the fate of the world. In the Castle of Ghosts, all the people from Westeros and beyond are forced to cooperate and try to halt the movement of the others before they can reach King's Landing. A castle overrun by death and vengeful spirits, Harrenhal is suddenly overrun by reanimated corpses, which puts not only the warriors, but those inside the castle in danger. Outside, Daenerys sets the Isle of Faces ablaze, hoping it can burn down before the snows arrive. Then, the swarm of others and the Night's King arrive. As Daenerys and Jon battle the Night's King, the God's Eye freezes over, and the battle rages on over the ice. Above, Daenerys and the Night's King have a dance of dragons, lighting up the night sky with dragon flame. As the battle comes to an end, both dragons tear into each other, slamming down into the lake in a burst of fire and ice. The Night's King is burned to a crisp, and Daenerys dies upon impact in the frozen lake. Below, the Isle of Faces burns, the last surviving weirwoods being put to the flame. The fire kills or cleanses them, putting an end to the others in the long night. Jon Snow, having suffered a fatal wound, is absorbed into the purified weirwoods. A pact is made at the weirwoods with the Green Men to end the feud between the Children of the Forest and mankind. The dragons and others are both vanquished, bringing balance to ice and fire. The sword Dawn is lost in the waters of the God's Eye. As the sun finally rises on Westeros, the surviving lords call a great council to decide the next ruler. With the Targaryen and Lannister lines almost certainly dead, there's a large debate over who deserves to rule. Who they decide is anyone's guess. Maybe the Ironborn make a play for the throne with their superior military strength. Maybe surviving Baratheon or Targaryen bastards try to make their claim. But my guess is that the King of the Weirwood, Bran Stark, is elected, not because of his blood or claim, but because he's the most logical choice given his powers. But given his disability, he's unable to father children, and a dynasty cannot be created. The great lords of Westeros decide to meet again when it's time to choose his heir. With this, the monarchy of Westeros is ended, and a pseudo-democracy is created, bringing an end to the Game of Thrones. That was just a blueprint, but for me it's a satisfactory way to tie up most of the major plot points in one battle in and around Harrenhal. There are definitely millions of different moving pieces which will complicate things, like Aegon VI, Cersei, and Euron. But I think this is the overarching idea that this story's been working towards. By combining many different wars and battles, from the beginning of Winds to the Dawn Age of Westeros, we can see that all the signs point to a final stand at Harrenhal, which I dub the Battle of Ice and Fire.